We're hoping that the information we're about to provide to you today will bring at least some clarity to the process of adjusting this rate, and more important, to help taxpayers understand that over time, that's over any given 3-year period, the legislation is revenue neutral. In other words, under the 2010 legislation, we're not paying any more than what we would have paid under the old tax structure. But the job right now for the board is to adjust the excise tax to achieve revenue neutrality as required by the fuel tax swap. I'd like to use these two gasoline examples here to try to illustrate the basic concept. Here you're going to see on the left side is a pump that represents how gasoline was taxed before the fuel tax swap. The one here on the right shows the current tax structure, and again, this is just an example. So let's follow through here. What the state legislature did was they took the sales tax here on the left, and as you can see, they lowered the sales tax. To make it up, they increased the excise tax so that the amount of state tax we pay remains the same. They are both equal. So you can see from this example in both versions that we are paying the same amount of tax. Now, under the fuel tax swap, the sales tax was reduced by 5%, and then the excise tax was adjusted upward to make up for that difference.
Revenue neutrality occurs over a 3-year period, but let me tell you how this works. Prior to 2010, we had a state-level sales tax on gasoline. After the fuel tax swap, the legislature replaced the state-level sales tax with an excise tax. Now, the sales tax is imposed as a percentage of price. The excise tax is imposed as a flat rate per gallon. The legislature had to make sure that the revenue that we would have brought in under the sales tax is the same as the revenue we are now bringing in under the excise tax. And it charged the BOE with adjusting the rate every year to ensure revenue neutrality over time. So let's assume that the BOE forecasts that sales tax revenue we would have brought in under the old tax structure were to increase. We would then need to adjust the excise tax to ensure that the revenue we bring in under the excise tax is no more or no less than what we would have brought in under the sales tax. Now let's assume in the second year that we forecast sales tax revenue that we would have brought in under the old tax structure to increase. We would then need to adjust the excise tax to ensure that we're bringing in the same amount of tax revenue under the excise tax as we would have brought in under the sales tax. Now in the third year, let's assume that the BOE forecasts that the sales tax revenue we would have brought in under the old law goes down. We would then need to adjust the excise tax rate downward. But we also add another step to this process. We need to look back at the first year, now that we have actual price data, and evaluate whether our forecast was correct and whether or not we over or underestimated. So let's assume that based on actual gas price data, we see that sales tax revenue actually would have gone up a little bit more under the old law. We would then need to offset our excise tax revenue over here to make up for what we underestimated over here. But over time, we're not bringing in any more or any less excise tax revenue than we would have brought in under the sales tax law. That's called a true-up, and this whole process is called the fuel tax swap.
One question that comes up quite often is, what is the biggest driver requiring these adjustments?
The single biggest driver, almost the only driver, is the price of gasoline. It's the price of gasoline. Again, what we are doing here is we are comparing what we would have collected under the sales tax, and we're setting an excise tax rate that makes it equal.
If we're driving more fuel-efficient cars these days, shouldn't this rate then be going down?
Driving fuel-efficient cars and lowering gas consumption helps drivers because they're consuming less gallons of gas, and they're paying less at the pump for gas, and they're also paying less sales tax. But it has nothing to do with the per gallon price of gasoline. And it's the per gallon price of gasoline that affects the amount of excise taxes that have to be collected under this fuel tax swap mechanism.